"I'll give you $7,000 if you address me in Neapolitan," laughed the mafia boss at the waitress, his eyes glinting with amusement as he studied her reaction. The surrounding men in expensive suits chuckled obediently, their collective gaze following her every move as she clutched her notepad tighter. Gianna Falcone's knuckles turned white as she forced a polite smile, mentally calculating how that amount would cover her mother's medical bills and the overdue rent notice taped to their apartment door. The restaurant's dim lighting couldn't hide the expensive watch on the man's wrist, or the subtle bulge beneath his tailored jacket that whispered danger. "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't speak Neapolitan," she replied softly, aware that every table in the upscale Manhattan restaurant had fallen silent. The man leaned forward, his cologne expensive and subtle, fingers drumming rhythmically on the pristine white tablecloth. 21-year-old Gianna had worked double shifts for the past 2 weeks, her nursing school textbooks gathering dust as her mother's condition worsened, and the medical bills multiplied. Her shoulders ached from carrying trays, and her feet burned in the mandatory heels that management insisted enhanced the dining experience. The man, whom other staff members had whispered was Sergio Bianchi, head of one of New York's most feared crime families, smiled with unexpected warmth that transformed his harsh features. "What languages do you speak then, little sparrow?" he asked, the nickname rolling off his tongue with practiced charm. "Italian, sir. My grandmother was from Sicily," Gianna answered, surprised by her own honesty, as the weight of her financial desperation pressed down on her shoulders. The restaurant manager hovered nervously nearby, clearly recognizing their dangerous customer. Sergio's expression changed subtly, a flash of genuine interest replacing his predatory amusement as he studied her more carefully. "Come to my office tomorrow at noon," he said, sliding a business card across the table with a perfectly manicured finger. "I don't think that would be appropriate," Gianna replied, though she didn't immediately withdraw her hand from the card, the promise of those $7,000 dancing in her mind. Her mother's medication had doubled in price last month, and the landlord wasn't accepting partial payments anymore. The other men at the table exchanged knowing looks, but Sergio silenced them with a barely perceptible gesture before returning his attention to her. "Nothing inappropriate, Ms. Falcone," he said, her name tag clearly visible. "Just a business proposition. Translation work for a legitimate enterprise." Her eyes widened slightly at how easily he controlled the room, how everyone from busboys to his own associates responded to his slightest movement. "How did you know I need money?" she asked, abandoning professional courtesy for brutal honesty. "Everyone needs money," Sergio replied with a shrug that made his expensive suit shift across broad shoulders. "But not everyone has skills worth paying for." He took a sip of wine, appraising her with eyes that seemed to read every financial worry etched across her features. Gianna's phone vibrated in her pocket. The hospital again, most likely with another update about her mother's deteriorating condition, or another form requiring her signature. The weight of responsibility pressed against her chest, making each breath a conscious effort. "Just translation work?" she asked, fingers finally closing around the business card, its embossed letters catching the light as she tucked it into her apron pocket. The address was in the financial district, a world away from her cramped apartment in Queens. Sergio nodded once, definitive and commanding, before returning to the menu as if their interaction had been entirely ordinary. "1 hour of your time for $7,000, he confirmed. "And if you impress me, there will be more opportunities." Gianna nodded and moved to the next table, her mind racing with possibilities and dangers as she mechanically took orders from oblivious diners. The business card seemed to burn in her pocket, a ticket to either salvation or destruction. 3 days later, Gianna stood outside the imposing glass skyscraper, her reflection distorted in its mirrored surface as she clutched her worn purse. The eviction notice had arrived that morning, giving her 72 hours to pay or vacate the apartment where her bedridden mother currently rested. Inside the building's marble lobby, security guards with concealed weapons tracked her progress to the private elevator that whisked her upward to the penthouse floor. Her heartbeat accelerated with each passing floor, the numbers illuminating with quiet precision. "Ms. Falcone, welcome," said a smartly dressed woman with sharp eyes and a Bluetooth earpiece, leading her down a hallway adorned with what appeared to be original artwork. Gianna recognized a Picasso and wondered how many illegal activities had funded its acquisition. Sergio's office showcased a city divided, the gleaming towers of wealth visible through one window, the struggling neighborhoods barely visible in the distance through another. He stood as she entered, more imposing in daylight than in the restaurant's forgiving shadows. "Your mother has lupus, requires specialized medication, And your landlord is Theodore Watts, a man known for exploiting vulnerable tenants, Sergio stated without preamble, gesturing for her to sit in a leather chair that probably cost more than her semester's tuition. The casual display of his knowledge sent ice through her veins. Gianna resisted the urge to flee, straightening her shoulders instead as she met his gaze directly. "You've been investigating me," she said. Not a question, but an accusation, her hands steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I investigate everyone who enters my world," he replied with a shrug, pouring sparkling water into 2 crystal glasses without asking her preference. "I'm offering you a position as my cultural attaché and translator, perfectly legal, well compensated, and with flexible hours for your studies." The proposition hung between them, suspiciously generous, yet desperately needed, and Gianna found herself cataloging the details of his face. 30 years old at most, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing, and a mouth that rarely smiled genuinely. Power emanated from him like heat from pavement in August. "Why me?" she asked finally, leaving the water untouched as suspicion warred with need in her mind. There must be professional translators with more experience and qualifications than a nursing student with conversational Italian. Sergio leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her feel transparent. "Most professionals lack certain qualities I value: hunger, discretion, and the moral flexibility that comes from genuine desperation," he explained, his accent becoming more pronounced as he continued. "I'm not morally flexible," Gianna protested, though the business card in her purse and her presence in this office suggested otherwise. The weight of her mother's medical needs pressed down on her shoulders like concrete blocks. Sergio smiled then, the expression transforming his face into something almost boyish, despite the calculating eyes that remained unchanged. "We all become flexible when someone we love is suffering," he observed with quiet certainty that suggested personal experience. Her phone buzzed again, the hospital's number flashing on the screen, and Gianna made her decision, as she had made every important choice in her life, quickly, decisively, and with her mother's well-being as the only consideration that truly mattered. "When do I start?" she asked, reaching for the water glass at last, her reflection fractured across its crystal surface as Sergio's smile widened with satisfaction. The decision felt simultaneously like surrender and the first autonomous choice she'd made in months. "Now," he replied, pressing a button on his desk that summoned his assistant with a leather portfolio and an envelope thick with cash. Her first payment in advance. "Your mother's medical bills have been addressed, and your landlord received payment this morning." The next 3 weeks transformed Gianna's understanding of both Sergio Bianchi and herself as she navigated the complex world of his legitimate businesses. Each morning, she dressed in the professional clothing he'd arranged for her, the designer labels initially feeling like a costume. Officially, she translated documents, attended meetings with Italian business partners, and helped navigate cultural nuances that could make or break international deals. Unofficially, she began to recognize the coded language that distinguished actual business from laundered transactions. "Your accent is improving," Sergio noted one evening, as they reviewed contracts in his private study, the city lights creating a glittering backdrop through floor-to-ceiling windows. His approval warmed her more than it should have, a dangerous emotional response she tried to suppress. The line between employer and something more complicated blurred with each late-night conversation about literature, music, and the Sicily of her grandmother's stories. Sergio's knowledge surprised her. Behind the ruthless businessman lurked a mind cultivated through voracious reading and genuine curiosity. "Why the Mafia?" she asked one night, the question escaping before caution could contain it as they shared Sicilian wine after a particularly successful negotiation. The question hung between them, dangerous and inevitable as her understanding of his world increased. Sergio's expression hardened momentarily, before softening into something more vulnerable than she'd witnessed before. "My father was killed when I was 12. His business partner's ambition exceeded his loyalty," he explained, swirling the ruby liquid in his glass. "So it's revenge?" Gianna pressed, emboldened by exhaustion and the strange intimacy that had developed between them as she became increasingly essential to his daily operations. Her nursing studies continued in the mornings, funded now by a scholarship he had mysteriously arranged. Sergio shook his head, his gaze distant as he considered her question with unexpected seriousness. It began as survival, evolved into revenge, and eventually became the only path available, a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. The dichotomy of the man fascinated her. capable of ordering violence without hesitation, yet ensuring her mother received the best specialist in New York, and personally visiting the hospital to ensure the staff's attentiveness. His contradictions defied simple categorization. His phone rang, the tense conversation in rapid-fire Neapolitan requiring no translation for Gianna to understand its ominous nature. Sergio's expression darkened as he ended the call, his eyes meeting hers with unexpected concern rather than his usual mask of control. "You should go home tonight, directly and without stops," he instructed, already texting someone as he moved toward his private elevator. The sudden shift from philosophical conversation to urgent action left her disoriented. "What's happening?" she asked, gathering her things quickly, recognizing the subtle shift in atmosphere that she'd learned indicated trouble approaching. The security team moved with heightened alertness, weapons no longer concealed but openly displayed. Sergio hesitated, then made a decision visible in the subtle relaxation of his shoulders. "The Palmieri family believes I've encroached on their territory," he explained, surprising her with his honesty as he escorted her to the elevator himself. "And have you?" she asked, stepping into the elevator that would separate them, suddenly afraid for reasons she couldn't entirely articulate. Their relationship, whatever its nature, had become something she wasn't prepared to lose. "No," he replied, holding the door open a moment longer, his expression uncharacteristically open. "But truth matters less than perception in this world, and they perceive a threat that must be answered with a show of force." The elevator doors closed on Sergio's concerned expression, leaving Gianna alone with her thoughts as she descended to the lobby. Two security men she recognized as Sergio's employees materialized from the shadows, flanking her without explanation. "Mr. Bianchi insists on your safety," one explained curtly when she questioned their presence, his hand constantly hovering near his concealed weapon. The black SUV waiting at the curb had bulletproof windows, a detail she wouldn't have noticed 3 weeks earlier. Her apartment felt different when she arrived. Smaller, shabbier, a temporary space rather than home. Her mother looked up from her medical bed in the living room, immediately sensing the tension in her daughter's posture, despite her attempted cheerfulness. "You've changed," her mother observed, patting the edge of the bed in invitation, her once strong hands now fragile with prominent veins and arthritis. Gianna sat carefully, avoiding the IV lines that had become a permanent fixture in their small living space. The news played silently on their second-hand television, breaking coverage of a fire at a warehouse in Brooklyn that Gianna recognized with a sickening lurch as one of Sergio's storage facilities. The reporter mentioned suspected arson and potential organized crime connections. Her phone rang at midnight, Sergio's private number, the one he'd told her to use only in emergencies. His voice sounded strained, background noise suggesting movement and multiple conversations happening simultaneously around him. "I need you to access files in my personal safe," he said without greeting, the urgency in his tone making her sit upright in the darkness of her bedroom. He gave detailed instructions about hidden mechanisms in his office bookshelf that would reveal the concealed vault. The security team arrived 20 minutes later to escort her back to the tower, the city streets eerily empty as they drove at speeds that ignored traffic laws. Her heart pounded with equal measures of fear and exhilaration, her role suddenly far beyond mere translation. Sergio's office showed signs of hasty departure, papers scattered, a half-empty coffee cup still warm on his desk. Following his instructions precisely, she located the hidden panel behind a first-edition Machiavelli, the irony not lost on her, as the safe door swung open silently. Inside were USB drives, paper documents, and a handgun that she deliberately avoided touching as she retrieved the specific folders he'd requested. Her nursing training had taught her to remain calm in emergencies, a skill now serving her in entirely unexpected circumstances. Dawn broke as she delivered the documents to a luxury hotel penthouse where Sergio had established temporary headquarters. His inner circle of advisors gathered around a makeshift command center. He looked exhausted but relieved at her arrival, momentarily touching her hand as she passed him the files. "The Palmieri family moved against 3 of our legitimate businesses tonight," he explained quietly, leading her to a corner where they could speak privately. "They're trying to provoke a public war that would draw police attention to operations they believe we're running." Gianna watched his face carefully, noting the careful word choice, "believe we're running," rather than confirmation or denial. The ethical line she'd promised herself she wouldn't cross seemed increasingly blurred as she became further embedded in his organization. "What happens now?" she asked, accepting the coffee an associate handed her, the adrenaline of the night beginning to fade into bone-deep exhaustion. Through the hotel windows, New York continued its morning routine, oblivious to the power struggle happening in its midst. "Now we negotiate from a position of strength," Sergio replied, his gaze moving to the documents she'd retrieved, evidence of something the Palmieris desperately wanted hidden, judging by the grim satisfaction in his expression. "And you decide if you want to continue this journey." 2 months after the Palmieri confrontation, Gianna moved her mother into a private medical facility with round-the-clock specialized care, funded by her increasingly generous salary. Her nursing studies continued, though her practical education now extended far beyond traditional medicine. Sergio's organization operated like a shadow government with departments handling everything from legitimate investments to territory enforcement, with Gianna gradually becoming his most trusted advisor. Her perspective as an outsider proved valuable, offering insights his lifelong associates missed. "The restaurant where we met is failing," Sergio mentioned casually over dinner in his newly renovated office, now fortified with security measures that would impress military installations. His culinary skills surprised her, another hidden facet of a man who continued to defy categorization. Gianna nodded, having heard the rumors from former co-workers she occasionally kept in contact with. "The owner invested everything in cryptocurrency last year," she explained, sampling the perfectly prepared risotto that reminded her of her grandmother's recipes. "I'm considering acquiring it," Sergio continued, watching her reaction carefully as he refilled her wine glass. "A legitimate business needs legitimate holdings. Restaurants, real estate, transportation companies that remain separate from our other activities." The hour didn't escape her notice, his subtle way of acknowledging her integration into his world, though she still maintained the fiction of temporary involvement. Her apartment sat empty most nights now, her presence at Sergio's side required at all hours. "The Palmieris have been quiet," she observed, changing the subject as she often did when conversation veered too close to her complicity in activities that existed in moral gray areas. The tenuous peace brokered through Sergio's leverage held, though tensions simmered beneath the surface. Lightning flashed outside the windows, illuminating Sergio's face in stark relief as he considered her words. "Too quiet," he agreed, setting down his fork with deliberate precision that signaled troubled thoughts. "They've been moving money offshore and recruiting former military personnel." The buzzing intercom interrupted their dinner, Sergio's security chief requesting immediate attention to an urgent matter. The ease with which they transitioned from intimate dinner to crisis management had become their normal, a dance they performed with increasing synchronicity. "Our informant in the Palmieri organization has gone silent," the security chief reported, displaying surveillance photos on a tablet. "His scheduled check-in was missed, and his tracking device has been deactivated, likely discovered and destroyed." Gianna recognized the missing informant with a jolt, a young man who occasionally delivered packages to Sergio's office, always with a friendly smile and casual conversation that had revealed nothing of his dangerous double role. The thought of his likely fate made her stomach clench. "Move our people to secure locations," Sergio ordered, already typing rapid instructions on his phone. "Activate Protocol 3 and inform our legitimate business managers to expect possible disruption." His voice remained calm, but Gianna detected the underlying tension in his tightened jaw. The security team dispersed to execute his orders, leaving them momentarily alone in the sudden silence. "You should stay here tonight," Sergio said, the suggestion not entirely professional, as his eyes held hers across the abandoned dinner table. Their relationship had evolved in unspoken ways over the months, professional boundaries blurring with proximity and shared danger. Neither had acknowledged the electricity that sometimes charged the air between them, both focused on the practical alliance that served their interests. "I should check on my mother," Gianna countered, though the medical facility's security had been personally vetted and enhanced by Sergio's team. Her hesitation stemmed from self-preservation rather than practical concerns. Emotional entanglement with Sergio Bianchi would complicate an already precarious situation. The Palmieri attack came 3 days later, not against Sergio directly, but against Gianna's mother's medical facility. The attempt failed due to Sergio's foresight in posting undercover security, but the message was clear. They had identified her as his vulnerability. "They'll pay for this," Sergio promised, his voice dangerously quiet as they stood in the facility's security office, reviewing footage of the intercepted attackers. His hand rested protectively on the small of her back, a gesture that felt both comforting and possessive. Gianna's professional demeanor cracked for the first time since joining his organization, her hands trembling with delayed shock and rage. "This isn't what I signed up for," she whispered, though even as the words left her mouth, she recognized their futility. Her mother had been moved to Sergio's private estate in Connecticut, surrounded by security that would protect a head of state. Gianna paced the guest suite adjacent to her mother's room, torn between gratitude for Sergio's protection and resentment at the danger her association had created. "You can leave," Sergio said from the doorway, startling her with his silent approach, a habit she'd never grown accustomed to despite months in his company. He looked genuinely troubled, the mask of control slipping to reveal unexpected vulnerability. The offer surprised her, not because he made it, but because the thought of leaving had become unimaginable. "And go where?" she asked, gesturing to encompass their situation. "The Palmieris won't forget my face or my connection to you just because I walk away." Rain lashed against the windows of the estate, the storm outside mirroring the tumultuous emotions in the room. "I could arrange a new identity, relocate you and your mother internationally," he suggested, though his expression suggested the option pained him. "Is that what you want?" Gianna challenged, stepping closer to him, suddenly tired of the unspoken current between them. Her hand rose to his face, tracing the scar at his temple that she'd never asked about despite her curiosity. Sergio captured her hand against his cheek, his composure finally breaking as he pulled her against him with unexpected gentleness. "What I want has rarely mattered in my life," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion rarely displayed. Their first kiss tasted of danger and inevitability, crossing a line that had been drawn in sand rather than stone from the beginning. Gianna surrendered to the moment, acknowledging that her fate had been sealed the night she accepted his business card. Morning found them strategizing rather than speaking of personal developments, their newfound intimacy seamlessly incorporated into their professional partnership. "The Palmieris expect retaliation, violent and immediate," Sergio explained, spreading maps across the library table. "Which is exactly why we shouldn't give them what they expect," Gianna countered, her mind working through alternatives with the analytical precision that had made her valuable to him. "They're vulnerable financially after their recent expansion. Attack their funding sources instead." Sergio's expression shifted from skepticism to consideration as she outlined her approach, using legal channels to freeze Palmieri assets through their legitimate business holdings. Banking irregularities reported anonymously to financial oversight committees, she suggested, thinking aloud. The strategy took shape between them, a blend of her outside perspective and his insider knowledge creating something neither could have developed alone. Their fingers occasionally brushed as they marked important locations on the maps, the casual contact charged with new meaning. "This could work without bloodshed," Sergio acknowledged finally, leaning back to survey their completed plan. "But it won't end them permanently. Financial recovery is possible, given time and resources they likely have hidden." 6 months after implementing their financial strategy against the Palmieris, Gianna stood at the window of Sergio's Manhattan penthouse, watching a police raid on the rival family's headquarters across town. The operation represented the culmination of their carefully orchestrated plan: anonymous tips, strategic evidence placement, and patience. "It worked exactly as you predicted," Sergio said, coming to stand beside her, his proximity now familiar and comforting rather than intimidating. His empire had not only survived but thrived during the conflict, emerging stronger while maintaining a pristine public image. Gianna nodded, watching the distant flashing lights with mixed emotions, satisfaction at protecting those she cared about, unease at the ease with which she'd orchestrated another organization's downfall. Her nursing degree hung framed on Sergio's office wall, unused yet symbolic of the healing she hoped to bring to his world. "Your associate Paolo has been meeting with the Calabresi family," she said after a moment of silence, turning to gauge his reaction to information she'd discovered through her own network of contacts. Trust required truth, even when uncomfortable. Surprise flickered briefly across Sergio's face before his expression settled into thoughtful consideration. "How long have you known?" he asked, making no move to deny her accusation as he poured them both a celebratory drink from the crystal decanter. 3 weeks, she admitted, accepting the glass with steady hands, her gaze unwavering as she added, "I wanted to see if you would tell me yourself, or if I would need to protect myself against betrayal from within your organization." The weight of her words hung between them, acknowledging the reality of their world. Trust was conditional, alliances temporary, and survival required constant vigilance. Sergio sighed, setting down his untouched drink and pulling a folded document from his jacket pocket. "Paolo was acting on my instructions," he explained, handing her the document, detailed plans for legitimate business partnerships with the Calabresi organization, focusing on international shipping and import companies. The strategy aimed at transition, rather than territorial expansion. Confusion crossed Gianna's face as she scanned the contents, her quick mind connecting implications she hadn't anticipated. "You're creating a legitimate business consortium," she realized, looking up with new understanding. "Consolidating power through legal channels." Sergio nodded, moving to his desk to retrieve additional files that revealed a comprehensive strategy she hadn't been aware of. "I've been working toward legitimate enterprises since before I met you," he admitted, spreading the documents for her inspection. The revelation stunned her. Not the existence of legitimate businesses, which she'd helped manage, but the systematic plan to transition completely away from criminal enterprises over a 5-year timeline. The strategy predated her arrival by nearly 2 years. The leather portfolio on his desk contained architectural plans for community revitalization projects in neighborhoods previously damaged by gang violence. Gianna traced her finger over blueprints for affordable housing, medical clinics, and educational facilities, tangible evidence of intentions beyond mere profit. "My grandfather was a builder before the family turned to other ventures," Sergio explained, revealing a piece of history he'd never shared before. His eyes held a distant look as he described the craftsman who had emigrated with dreams of creating rather than destroying. The realization that Sergio had been fighting a two-front war against rival families externally while internally redirecting resources toward legitimacy made Gianna reassess their entire relationship. Each business decision suddenly appeared in new context, a complex chess game with higher stakes than territorial control. Bank statements revealed substantial anonymous donations to rehabilitation centers for former gang members, providing skills training and legitimate employment opportunities. The philanthropy operated through layers of shell companies that obscured their connection to Sergio, preventing both legal scrutiny and reputation benefits. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, hurt mingling with understanding as she processed this new information about the man she'd come to know intimately, yet still discovered new layers within. The complexity of his motivations continued to surprise her. Sergio's expression softened as he moved closer, taking her hands in his. "At first, because I didn't trust you," he admitted with characteristic honesty. "Later, because I feared you'd see it as manipulation, a story designed to ease your conscience about working with me." The city lights created patterns across the polished floor as they stood together in momentary silence. "My father's killer was never punished by the law," Sergio continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "But he was destroyed by his own choices. Drinking, gambling, paranoia." Understanding dawned as pieces clicked into place. Sergio's meticulous attention to health, his avoidance of substances that clouded judgment, his long-term strategic thinking. "You wanted revenge, but you wanted to succeed where he failed even more," she realized aloud. Gianna studied the man before her with new clarity. Not simply a criminal with occasional moments of decency, but a strategic mind playing a long game with clearly defined end goals. "What happens when the transition is complete?" she asked, the question weighted with personal implications. "That depends on you," Sergio answered, vulnerability rarely displayed now openly visible in his expression. "I've built something that can last beyond the shadows, but I don't want to walk into that future alone." The wedding was small, but elegant, held in the restored restaurant where they'd first met, now a successful establishment under their legitimate business umbrella. Gianna's mother attended in a wheelchair, her condition stabilized though not cured, her smile radiant as she watched her daughter begin a new chapter. "Mrs. Bianchi," Sergio whispered against Gianna's ear as they shared their first dance, the name both strange and fitting as she adjusted to this new identity. The guests represented a careful blend of legitimate business partners and trusted associates from their shared past. Their honeymoon took them to Sicily, to the small coastal village where Gianna's grandmother had been born, reconnecting with roots that provided foundation for their future. The ancient stones and timeless sea offered perspective on their relatively small lives and choices. "I want to establish a medical foundation," Gianna announced one morning as they walked along the beach, her professional training finding new purpose in their evolving empire. "Specializing in autoimmune research and treatment accessibility for underserved communities." Sergio nodded thoughtfully, already mentally allocating resources and considering potential partnerships with research institutions. "We could start with a clinic near your old neighborhood," he suggested, his business mind automatically expanding her concept into actionable strategy. Upon returning to New York, they accelerated the transition timeline, divesting from shadowy enterprises more rapidly than originally planned. Some associates resisted, comfortable in the old ways and suspicious of legitimate business with its regulations and oversight. Paolo is organizing resistance, Gianna informed Sergio after intercepting concerning communications, the skills she'd developed during the Palmieri conflict, now serving to protect their new vision. Her network of loyal contacts extended throughout the organization. The confrontation occurred in their conference room, Paolo and 3 senior lieutenants expressing their concerns about abandoned territories and lucrative operations being shuttered. "You're destroying what your father built," Paolo accused, his loyalty to old ways overriding his personal regard for Sergio. "My father built a prison," Sergio replied calmly, remaining seated as tensions escalated around the polished conference table, every day wondering which associate would betray him, which rival would attack, which prosecutor would build a case that would stick. Gianna watched the exchange silently from her position beside Sergio, noting which associates seemed receptive to their vision and which remained entrenched in criminal mindsets. The division was becoming clearer with each passing week, forcing decisions about who could transition with them. "I'm offering you partnerships in legitimate enterprises with consistent profits and 0 risk of imprisonment," Sergio continued, sliding folders across the table containing detailed business proposals, or generous severance packages to pursue your own paths elsewhere. The choice presented reflected their new approach: opportunity rather than threats, business rather than violence, though the underlying steel in Sergio's voice made clear that opposition would not be tolerated. The room divided visibly between forward-looking associates and old guard resistors. "Your father would be ashamed," Paolo spat, pushing away from the table without opening the folder, followed by 2 associates whose expressions suggested their decisions were already made. The door closed behind them with quiet finality, a chapter ending. Gianna squeezed Sergio's hand beneath the table, feeling the tension in his body though his face remained impassive. "We knew there would be casualties," she reminded him softly, as the remaining associates reviewed the proposals with increasing interest. Progress accelerated following the split. Cleaner operations, smoother transitions, and innovative approaches from team members embracing legitimate challenges. Their corporate headquarters expanded into adjacent buildings, housing medical research, import-export operations, and restaurant management divisions. The diplomatic missions to former rival territories required delicate navigation, with Gianna often serving as intermediary, where her nursing background provided credibility, separate from Sergio's complicated history. Her genuine concern for community health initiatives opened doors that would have remained closed to him alone. Local government officials, initially suspicious of their sudden interest in urban development, gradually became allies as promised projects materialized without the expected strings attached. The Bianchi Neighborhood Revitalization Grant funded parks, after-school programs, and small business incubators in areas previously controlled through intimidation. "You're building a legacy that heals rather than harms," Gianna observed one evening as they reviewed applications for their scholarship program, targeting students from neighborhoods affected by gang violence. The irony wasn't lost on either of them, using wealth accumulated through questionable means to create opportunities that might prevent others from following similar paths. Former enemies became reluctant business partners, as Sergio's reputation transformed from feared enforcer to respected entrepreneur whose handshake carried more weight than written contracts. The transition wasn't without setbacks. 2 attempts on his life by old guard diehards who viewed legitimacy as betrayal of their code. 3 years after their wedding, Gianna stood in the newly opened Bianchi Medical Center, watching patients receive treatments that would have saved her mother had they been available sooner. The facility represented the culmination of her personal journey, from desperate waitress to philanthropic medical director. Her mother's photograph hung prominently in the lobby, her legacy living on through research advancements funded by the foundation bearing her name. The clinic primarily served low-income patients, providing cutting-edge treatments regardless of insurance status or ability to pay. The governor confirmed his attendance at next week's charity gala, Sergio mentioned as he joined her, his business attire impeccable as always, though now worn for board meetings rather than intimidation tactics. His transformation from feared crime boss to respected entrepreneur and philanthropist had been methodical and complete. The final traces of their criminal past had been systematically erased, records destroyed, associates transitioned or retired, territories abandoned to rivals who subsequently faced federal prosecution without Bianchi involvement. Their history remained known only to them and a handful of trusted confidants. Paolo was arrested in Miami, Gianna informed him, having maintained surveillance on potential threats out of habit rather than necessity. Their former associate had attempted to establish his own organization after leaving, lacking Sergio's strategic vision and Gianna's attention to detail. Sergio nodded without satisfaction, having predicted this outcome years earlier when offering Paolo alternatives. "Some people can't imagine a different path," he observed, his arm slipping naturally around her waist as they walked through the clinic's research wing. The laboratory teams worked diligently on autoimmune treatments, their research already producing promising results that had attracted partnerships with major pharmaceutical companies and research universities. Gianna's nursing knowledge combined with academic collaborations had created innovative approaches to previously stubborn medical challenges. "The restaurant chain expansion is proceeding ahead of schedule," Sergio added as they continued their tour, referring to the legitimate business that had grown from that first restaurant where they'd met. Their company now operated 30 high-end establishments across the East Coast. A young doctor approached with test results requiring Gianna's review, her professional respect evident as she addressed the woman who had revolutionized their research protocols. Gianna transitioned seamlessly into her medical director role, examining the data with trained precision. "We've identified a new biomarker that might predict treatment response," the researcher explained excitedly, pointing to highlighted sections of the report. "The breakthrough could potentially allow for personalized treatment approaches, maximizing efficacy while reducing side effects." Sergio watched his wife with undisguised pride, appreciating the intelligence and compassion that had first attracted him that night in the restaurant. Her question in Neapolitan had surprised him then, a server suddenly responding fluently after his casual test of her heritage. Their child would be born into a world different from either of their beginnings, neither the desperate circumstances of Gianna's youth, nor the dangerous privilege of Sergio's criminal inheritance. The nursery, prepared in soft colors and furnished with handcrafted pieces commissioned from Sicilian artisans, awaited a future they had both once considered impossible. The international expansion of their medical research network had attracted attention from global health organizations, with Gianna scheduled to address the World Health Summit on innovative funding approaches for rare disease treatment. Her journey from struggling nursing student to healthcare innovation leader represented personal transformation paralleling their business evolution. The memory made him smile. How differently things might have gone had she not possessed that particular skill, had he not noticed her potential beyond her circumstances. Their meeting had been chance, but everything that followed represented deliberate choices and carefully constructed possibilities. "We should visit Sicily again next month," Gianna suggested, as they finished their clinic tour, returning to more personal matters now that business had been addressed. "I'd like to explore establishing a satellite research facility in partnership with the university there." Sergio nodded in agreement, mentally reviewing their schedule of commitments and making necessary adjustments. Their lives had found balance between ambition and enjoyment, work and personal connection, a harmony neither had experienced before finding each other. From $7,000 for speaking Neapolitan to building a medical research empire, Sergio mused as they exited the clinic, sunlight warming their faces as they walked toward their waiting car. "I'd say that was the best business proposition I ever made. And I'd say it was the best desperate decision I ever made," Gianna replied with a smile, standing on tiptoe to kiss him briefly, before sliding into the car that would take them to their next appointment. The city around them had transformed from a landscape of threats to one of opportunities. Thank you all for following this story to the end. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where in the world you're watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, as your support is crucial for me to continue creating content.